call the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Could do the roll call, please, Paul?
Megan? Here. Brian? Present. Brooks? Here. Rob? Here. Alyssa? Here. Michael? Here. Barb?
Here. Okay. Thank you all for being here. Approval of the agenda.
So, one item, unless Steve or Jordan have an issue with it, to remove the plat of tracks 10, 11, 12, and 13 as it is presented on the consent calendar to allow, since if your plan's not to file it anyway, to come back with the accurate plat. Since it wouldn't do any good to approve it and then dies on the vine.
Could I request to move item 4.2 to discussion?
Sure. Okay, so we've got those two changes. Anything else? If not, I'll entertain a motion for that amended agenda.
I move to approve the amended agenda.
Bassett, I'll second.
Okay, we've got a motion, a second to approve the amended agenda. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, minutes. Anybody see anything? Alyssa, you see anything?
Could I make one adjustment on, sorry, let me get to that here. On the rezone application, it talks about the concern with the access between the residential lots. I think there was also a concern about commercial traffic on the residential street. So there was two issues there.
Okay. Can we get that added in the minutes?
We can.
Okay.
Melissa will hear the recording and make a note, and we'll have corrected minutes.
Okay. All right. So, is there a motion then to approve the minutes as amended?
I'd bring second.
Okay, motion and second to approve the amended minutes. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Time for public comments. If you're here to talk about something other than what's on the agenda, we welcome your input. Anybody got anything? Okay. Okay, moving on to rezone application of River Park Edition.
Did you want to do the rezone first, or would you like to do the plat first? Do you have a preference?
Let's do,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, so we moved to discussion. Yeah, you wanted to talk about the plat. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, so I had a couple questions. So this parcel falls back behind Ace Hardware, if I'm reading it correctly. It's bound by residential to the east, and then on the east side and the south side by existing commercial. I have two questions. Number one, since we have new property boundaries, I don't know how close those are to existing structures. And what I would hate to do is approve something that would put those existing structures in violation from rear and side yard setbacks. And so that information's not on this request for a replat. My other concern is, has this been reviewed by the fire department? With that plat back there, I don't believe that there's enough turning room to do turning movements for fire vehicles, and that's about a 500-foot drive access.
So it's an open parking lot. We just put that mutual access easement in there so they had access to that lot. And then when we went through the plat approval process, they do provide an exhibit. So we did, city staff checked to make sure that none of it was creating a nonconformance.
Okay. I understand it's an open parking lot right now, but we can't control what happens in the future. So to me, that's a 500-foot dead-end street. I know most communities do have stipulations. Most of them I've seen, it's usually like 250 feet. Then you have to have space for turning movements like a hammerhead turnaround or cul cul-de-sac or something like that. I don't know if that has been confirmed with our fire department.
Our fire department is just a volunteer fire department, so we don't submit every site plan to them. Usually when we have a development plan or something, we give it to them and they provide comments as a courtesy. But these meet city standards.
So do we have other questions on the plat?
I guess we'll have to assume that this has been reviewed and coordinated with the other city requirements. We don't, zoning doesn't dictate fire department, but I know in most of the communities I've worked with, this would not pass. But I'll have to assume, based on that answer, that it's been coordinated.
So then we need a motion to approve it? Because it got pulled off of the consent calendar, is that correct?
That is correct.
I'll make a motion based on the response received from city staff to approve this.
No, second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to approve the plat. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. All right, now we go to the rezone, Patrick?
Yep, and we
Okay.
do have two members of Van Buskirk here. Just to wrap up kind of where we were in the process, I put a memo on there. Originally, you looked at a plan for the rezone on May 15th. You had some issues with the access in the street, and it was a unanimous recommendation to the council not to approve. Then the city council held its public hearing on June 2nd. At that meeting, Van Buskirk looked at your thoughts and presented a revised plan for the lots, and city council passed it as a first reading with the hope that you all would give them a revised recommendation based on the new layout before the second reading that they would vote at. So that is where we are, and they're here to talk about their revisions.
Jordan Hefner with Van Busker Companies out of Sioux Falls. So, after our first meeting here, I took our plans back to my boss Steve at Van Buskirk, and we revised both the residential and the commercial parcels, putting all four of the residential parcels together to show a commercial driveway on both sides. So we eliminated the driveway in the middle of the four residential parcels, took the commercial parcels down to 4 from 5, so we don't have anything that's landlocked in the middle. We don't need that center driveway. So the residential parcels themselves did not change in shape or size. They're still for the same fourplex buildings that we discussed the last time I was here. We just changed the access for tract 2C and 2B. Yeah. Our current layout is
Patrick, what would the setback, because they have driveways on the sides then, so what would the setback for that driveway be off of the residential? Do you know how much?
I gave it to him.
So it would be for GB, of course, as well as residential, you can't have your driveway in the side yard setback. So the side yard setback on GB is 7. If it's next to a residential on the side, that 7 becomes 15.
And it doesn't show that on the plat, but how wide is that driveway? Was on the next page, okay. 56, okay.
So when you submit this for the potential rezone that we're talking about here tonight, at the same time, will you be platting tracks 2A, B, C, and D? So this is arbitrary. The plat, what you're showing for property lines is, there's no guarantee.
Yeah, it's a concept.
It's concept.
Yeah, until we get, so, well, maybe I'll hand this out too, so, or do you wanna pass that one out? So we put this together as well, so this is the general idea of what we wanna do, so apologize, it's really rough because our draftsman got married and went on a honeymoon rather than drafting for us the last couple of weeks, so, so this is, Steve drafting 101, so, and the last drafting class was in, 8th grade, so it's been a little bit. But anyway, so this is kind of the idea. The orange on here is, a mutual access, because what, the vision is that there's going to be a parking field, facing Holly Boulevard, with a mutual access that runs all the way through. So that would be the primary access, across the whole area. The blue boxes, nothing's to scale here, but, just gives you an idea where the buildings are. The buildings the commercial buildings would back up to the residential housing and face front. Originally we had 3 lots in there, thinking that there would be, because it's a quarter mile long, along here. So we're putting a break in there so we could have that original driveway in between, but we eliminated that one based on comments. Because I think it didn't occur to us that it would be a problem to have commercial on across from residential, because it was all commercial prior, so, or on that street. So hopefully this is a little bit more acceptable, so if we do a couple driveways, back out to the street, is kind of what we're thinking, just to give some other access points, because we're anticipating bigger buildings, on the 2 ends, and they, it won't be, easy to get around on the backside of that, of those buildings. So we wanted to have a secondary access for the commercial, so they wouldn't necessarily have to go through the parking lot to get out, on the long east-west street, the long orange line that parallels Holly Boulevard. So hopefully that graphic kind of makes sense, but it just, and then, well, what we did is, and then on the bottom, we took a couple bigger, so the colored one down below, we just did a cut and paste, but those are, commercial a couple larger commercial buildings, on the sides, for concepts, and then, the 2 driveways, you can see that, but then we'd have the, the buildings, running parallel to Holly Boulevard would be the general idea. And the part of the reason why we're doing this is that with the customer that we're working on in 2A, that street got really far south of Holly Boulevard, is part of what we're faced with a design challenge for the subdivision. Most buildings aren't that big. The most, strip mall development, whether it be an office or a retail center, something along those lines that's appropriate for GB, you can fit those into 205 feet for a lot depth, and, we had 374 feet for lot depth. So it really didn't make a lot of sense, because we weren't going to, the market's not such where you're going to be able to face commercial to Holly and commercial to Riverstone is the street that parallels Holly. You're not going to have, double frontage commercial that works out very well. So it would have been pretty hard to, find something that would fill in that that area, you know, between the commercial building that'd be facing Holly, which would be the primary retail, and whatever the commercial was facing Riverstone. And it's gonna take a while, you know, to fill the commercial up along here, so that's why we thought, we got Jordan involved with the townhouse project. We thought, we got a street there that's gonna sit there for a long time, not getting used, and we can put some townhouses along there and get some activity and get things moving and get some rooftops going up out here and get some housing in place for the community. So I don't know if that graphic makes much sense. And I think what we're hoping is that the revised plat, and that this is a Patrick or Tammy question, I'm not sure, but what we submitted for that revised plat with the 4 of them that that Jordan handed out, is that could be approved. And, you know, to keep the housing project going, because we're trying to get that going in July. But yeah, as far as what happens next with the commercial, we're gonna have to come back for plats. Every time we come in for a plat, we have to come in, right, Patrick? Isn't that what we have to do? So you'll see this thing unfold, so, but that's the concept of what we've got in mind, and it makes sense for marketing, keeps our commercial, that's the most viable commercial that we've got, you know, with that long, linear development paralleling Holly, so, any questions?
Steve,
Thoughts?
can you, state your name and address for the
Sure,
recording?
Steve Van Buskirk, 2571 Southwest Lake Drive, Sioux Falls.
Another question for staff. Access points, into track 2A and 2D from Holly. I'm assuming traffic studies have been done for this development. How far south do those curb cuts need to be?
So we have talked about that quite a bit. We did the corridor study along Holly Boulevard. They do need to be 300 feet since it is an arterial road, Holly is. You know, there is plans to put in roundabouts here so that we would have medians. And so when we went through one of the site design on track 2A, it does make sense to lessen that 300-foot rule as long as it's a right in, right out with a median. So we have worked through quite a few of those access locations.
Yeah, and if I may, that orange line, don't look at that orange line and say that's where we're going. That's just kind of the idea of it. So it's more refined than that. That's just kind of showing you the idea. So that, we're not looking to be at that exact location. We have to comply with those comments just made.
The reason I asked is, when I first saw this without this sketch, was, you know, like I mentioned earlier, one of the other concerns that we had was, truck traffic, commercial traffic on a double-sided residential street. And so if someone is headed eastbound and they want to stop at something that's located in track 2B or in track 2A, are they necessarily going to go all the way up to River Park and then backtrack to get there? Or are they going to take the shortest route and come off South Peaceful Avenue and drive between the residential to get there? So, I guess, I know you can't say you'll guarantee it, but if there is access to those tracks from River Park and Peaceful Avenue, that makes me a little more comfortable.
There is access, yes.
But you can't guarantee it because they're not platted, you don't have the easements in place to go across track 2A to get to 2B, across track 2D to get to track 2C. So until those are platted with those easements, they're not 100% guaranteed.
Right.
Are you developing those lots, or are you gonna sell them off for someone else to build on?
It depends who shows up. So, but what we can control as part of the whole negotiation, just like what we're doing with 2A, is have a mutual access easement across so it gets to 2B. So when we do 2B, then we can get to 2C, and when we get to 2C, we can get to 2D. So it's just part of the it's just things that you have to manage as you go through, so it's normal course of business for us.
But it doesn't guarantee that we're not gonna have delivery truck, garbage truck, tenants, commercial tenants driving between double stacked residential street on Riverstone.
Yeah, I mean, we're not a police department, so we can't guarantee where people are gonna drive, you know, so you're right about that. But what I can guarantee is that we're gonna control is mutual access, because that's how retail works well. They wanna have access as close as they can to the road, and that's where the customers go, yeah.
I guess in my mind, if the horse was leading the cart, this would be easier to say yes to. But right now, the cart's ahead of the horse in terms of guaranteeing that we're not going to see semi-truck traffic and dump truck traffic and retail traffic going down a double-loaded residential street.
Well, dump trucks they go down residential streets now, don't they? I mean, what's the,
I understand.
what ordinance?
I
are we
understand that.
getting
I'm just talking about the additional amount of traffic generated by commercial. Now going down what was half residential, half commercial, now going down full residential on both sides of the street. We talked about that the last time that was one of the issues that we had. Typically, we try to isolate commercial traffic from residential traffic.
Yeah.
I should have taken a picture of it, but after having this conversation a couple weeks back, Brandon Bluffs, our development right next to this, had an 18-wheeler with a 53-foot trailer sitting on Autumn and Karna. How do we prevent that as a developer? I guess that's kind of what I tried to bring up this last go around too. I work in these developments all day, every day. There's nothing we can do as a developer. There's nothing planning and zoning can do as a body to prevent traffic unless it's completely stated that we can't have any truck traffic on it. I mean, as a developer, as Steve's representative, I would really prefer to not have an 18-wheeler fully loaded down on a brand new completed residential road as well. But we're providing 4 accesses to these commercial properties. I felt that was a pretty adequate answer for us the last go around as well. We're providing 4 accesses for 4 commercial properties. I would say we're definitely trying to check that box off for you. So.
Do you have an ordinance to post no truck traffic? I mean, is there an ordinance that we can?
I'm not saying that we have an ordinance, but in the design of what we do in our city and how we plan it, we don't put commercial behind residential off of our major streets. That's how we try to address it. We don't enforce it. We can't enforce it.
Yeah.
My point is, in the design of things and what we previously approved, this is different than what we previously approved.
Yeah, I know it is. That's why we're here.
And we may not have approved it if this is what was presented in the preliminary. And
I understand that.
that's how we don't say we can't have commercial traffic, but we try to prevent it through the design of our neighborhoods.
Right.
I mean, I'm speaking for myself. There's others here that may have differing opinions.
Well, we tried to pivot and we heard what you said, and we tried to do the best we could with what we've got there. So we're trying to react to it and present an option that would be more favorable to you. So.
You mentioned, and this wouldn't be part of what we're doing now, but you mentioned 4 accesses being potentially provided, so would that be, and it's conceptual because these aren't being platted, but would that be all off of, would that be directed to A? And then that kind of quote unquote driveway area that's on 2B, I mean, is that where two of them would be and then similar on the same side? Is that what you're talking about when you say four
Yeah.
accesses?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, at least four, I mean,
Yeah.
this is meant to show the mutual access, with this customer here, there's actually two on River Park, for instance, is what's been discussed. There's been, so there's two over here, so that, if it, so, and I would kind of anticipate, the same sort of thing over here on this end. So there's two there, but this is meant to show the mutual access and the flow that we're gonna protect, however it winds through the area.
Okay.
I have a question. All right, if people can get into the commercial properties from Peaceful Avenue and River Park Avenue, why do you need those north-south roads coming out to, I don't know what the name of that street is? Riverstone, okay, why would you even need those?
Well, it goes back, it's a long way in, to the middle, cause it's a quarter mile long. So, to get in there, it'd be, easier to get, the way we had it split before, to come in the middle. So a little bit of that was the middle one, and I think the two, we need that for plating is what I was thinking. I don't know if Tammy or Patrick, we need to get out to Riverstone for plating, so we need frontage out there.
Your utilities also cannot cross property lines, so it needs to come off of Riverstone.
So water and sewer will go up those, actually,
They can do a utility access easement, just like what we just passed right before this one, where they're going through the Ace Hardware property to get to a parcel that's buried on all four sides.
We don't wanna do that because then it pretty much makes it a public utility where we don't wanna have a sewer main through there that the city would maintain. Doing it this way, it makes it all private.
Yeah, I could see, from at least where I sit, I could see why you added those on the side so that those two lots weren't. They're certainly not kind of landlocked, quote unquote, then, it gives an option at least, and it doesn't port it through the four residential properties, so it at least would give a better opportunity for traffic to flow, even if those are the main access, which they very likely won't be, even if they were, to those middle two lots. At least it doesn't have to cross the residential, so I could see why you did that, and it's preferable to the middle for sure, for me.
I see it encouraging delivery vehicles to come on the back way, based on the concept. Delivery vehicles are gonna wanna go to the back, they're not gonna wanna maneuver through tight parking, lanes. So, to me, this is encouraging delivery vehicles to come along that residential street.
Steve, are these necessarily going to be retail establishments, or could they be offices where we don't deal
They-
with deliveries?
Yeah, they general business, they very well could be office. I think it's probably gonna tend more towards that, and professional services is kind of more what I would think. I don't see big retailers in there, that's what the two ends are for. That's what they want, is the visibility, for the retail as in the corners and the access, so that's more where I see those, and that's why they're bigger, deeper, north to south. But the middle, I mean, just look at, what we've been trying to get in Eagle Creek, it's, ambush basketball and a dentist and a pharmacy and, hair salon and chiropractor, and, you know, that's what it's gonna be, you know, so, you know, whatever they need is coming on the same Amazon truck that's going to all the houses, so.
I'm a little bit torn here because, I don't really like the residential there, but I think given where that road is, I understand your reasoning for that. I mean, when we look at, just looking at the plat here, we look at, Quick Star, that lot's only about 250 deep. So you add another 120 feet on there or whatever it is, you probably don't need that whole piece that wide. So I think as far as the use of land where that current road is, I understand why you're going there. It would have been nice to have that planned a little bit better. I'm not sure where, what the plan was to make that wide. Was there a reason to make that parcel that deep to start with on the original plan, or?
It was totally driven by the customer on 2A. So that's, you know, that's what they needed, you know, so that's where it comes from. And, you know, to bend a road up in there, it's just, you know, put a bunch of curves in there to tighten it up doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, it's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of bends, a lot of parts and pieces, and messes with your whole subdivision layout going down from there. I mean, you know, from this, yeah, you know, what do you put back there? You know, it's going to be, you know, the other stuff you see is essentially storage, you know, behind those things, you know, so what's more useful? That's not really highest and best use for the neighborhood, I don't think. You know, we're gonna have some good services here, you know, so we can get some people living in these areas. And honestly, we never, you know, so, I mean, it makes good sense, and really never even thought about this line of thought, because we've never run into it before. We've done this many times in other spots, so it was kind of well, that's how we'll fill it in. So, you know, that, because we're scratching our heads like, how are we gonna make this work, you know, in this middle piece. So, you know, you know, we looked at, you know, what makes the most sense, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 units, and we ended up with the 4 to get it filled in to make it functional and useful. So you know, so I think we've seen other spots where it's, you know, the discussion about the, you know, the trucks on the street wasn't part of it, you know, from our perspective anyway, good or bad. But yeah, I'm not sure.
I do like the 2 driveways on the side, if for some reason 2D and 2A were the last to be developed, with that one driveway, I could see that just being a mess with delivery vehicles and stuff so I like the 2 driveways. I'm glad you made that change. I would like to have had something different than having residential and then having commercial come through there. But given what the situation is, I think that having these 4 units there is a good use of that land. It is a very deep lot for probably the commercial that's going to go there. So rather than having wasted land, I think we are better off having a good use there. And whether fourplexes is the best thing or storage units is kind of probably the choice, and maybe fourplexes is better. So.
Well, yeah, usually what we see is, you know, the transition from, you know, commercial to multi-housing, you know, to housing, you know, so this is, you know, nice low density, 1-story multi-housing, you know, so, you know, so, you know, it's a smoother transition, you know, so you got, you know, so it looks better aesthetically. It's better for the people across the street, you know, having houses across the street, you know, office and commercial general business, you know, those are daytime hour operations, you know, so they're winding down when people are coming home, you know, so the conflicts aren't maybe there in the evenings, you know, for some of that, you know, so if, you know, that concern, cause I get it, you know, I understand, I hear the concern, so.
I don't really have necessarily a problem with the fourplexes backing up to the commercial. I think the biggest concern is that you're competing with that commercial traffic, not just the properties backing up to the commercial, they're also getting the traffic of the commercial. I think if it wasn't for the traffic coming on that street, I wouldn't have any problem with the fourplexes backing up to the commercial, see that. But I don't know how you would fix that flow without having some traffic there. But I think that given the layout of that land, I think there's gonna be some space that needs to be used, and I guess if our choice is this or storage units, or I'm not sure what else would go there if we don't wanna have, and I certainly think that the fourplexes would be better than storage units across from residential, so I don't know what else, how to fix that unless you could get more commercial in there, but that would, then they wouldn't have the frontage on Holly. I don't know,
Yeah, and we're, the double fronted, I mean, that's what we tried on Eagle Creek, where the church is at, so we've had we still got dirt floors in there. We've had that for 15 years, so we've paid the price for that lesson. So it, having double stack of commercial, we don't want to wait for it again. We're still waiting for it. That was a risk, and we stuck our neck out there to, try to get some commercial going, stimulate something, and, it worked as well as it worked, but not to anybody's satisfaction. You wouldn't go repeat that again. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
What's the width of that street, Riverstone? The actual street. Is there a typical residential width? Okay. While she's looking that up, so when this first came in, we had commercial on one side, residential on the other side. Is it the best? No. Is it kind of necessary? Yes, at some point you have to transition from one to the other. My concern when you start to put residential on both sides, just to maybe clarify my concern, is now you're more than likely going to have parking on both sides of the street. And now you start to drive delivery trucks through there on a regular basis. That's what causes me anxiety. From representing the city. So I just want to express why I made the comment that I made before.
Yeah, no, I get it. And, if it was commercial, the original plan, commercial and residential, I still think there'd be parking on the north side because they'd have a lot of curb and gutter on there. So it's pretty easy for people to park because there's no driveways out there to mess. So the people still would have been parking there, I do believe.
They may park there, but more than likely, if you have an option, you're going to park on your side of the street. Now, if your side of the street's full, yeah, you'll park on the other side. But now you'll have people living on both sides of the street that their first option is going to be to park on their side of the street, which is basically both sides of the street. So it just narrows down the width of the drivable space. I look at my neighborhood. If there are cars parked on both sides of the road and a large vehicle needs to go through there, it gets pretty tight. That's why I voiced my concern.
Which is why they won't go through there. That helps. That's traffic calming. That's why they pinch those streets. So then it makes it uncomfortable and they won't go down there again. So if it's a regular drive, looking at the site plan of the fourplexes, I don't know, is that enough room to park a car in between?
Between the units, there's not enough room to park a car on the street.
Yeah, so if you look at that, so along there's really not enough room to park in between. How that's designed is so that people park in front of their unit on the driveway. That's the thought process.
By the time you get the approach flares, between the units on there, there's not really enough room to park. Maybe a very small car, there's not enough room to do even relatively high density street parking. Pretty much with any of the townhomes that we build. So, there's just, you know, 4 units there, there's over 80 feet of driveway. So there's not a whole lot of room for street parking between those units.
That road
Do you-
is
Could we,
30,
could we, go ahead.
that road is 39 to back of curb. Where community collector is 33.
One advantage I see of this plan over the one with the road going up between is that if anybody who wants to come in from the south and go up there is not gonna go in front of the fourplexes. Go on this, you know, come down on Riverstone and go just to the road and you'd think they'd come in on Peaceful and then turn onto Riverstone, then go up. Or come down River Park, go to Riverstone and go up. So they wouldn't you'd think there'd be less chance that they'd be driving right in front of the fourplexes. Whereas before it would be like, you'd have to go in front of them to go up in between them. So I
Right.
see that as an advantage of this. I wonder, one thing I do wonder about is, okay, so the people who live on track 10 and track 13, those two north-south drives will be by them. So they're the ones who are going to have the most traffic beside them. And they'll be living there before the other stuff comes in. And so, gosh, I hope they know that that's what's planned when they buy that place. Because I'd hate to see them come in here later and say, we got van traffic past our, we didn't know that was going to be there. You know how people are sometimes. So, but otherwise I do see an advantage with this.
If I could just say
Yeah.
one thing to that, just to bring it up so it's back fresh. These are planned to be Van Buskirk owned units. So the person at the end of track 10 and the person at the end of track 13 are renters. They won't be buying that property. These are properties that we intend to hold for the
And what we could do too is when we do those driveways, just kind of taking your thought there, and we could post delivery trucks here, so we could post a sign, to try to intercept them. We may not get all of them, but something appropriately, but like a delivery trucks, and an arrow, so we could try to catch them before they run through the neighborhood. So if those guys are looking how to do it right too, if they're confused, they don't know what to do. So.
I wasn't at the meeting. Did city council have any issues with it?
We really didn't discuss it because we were kind of scared of it, so we said, send it back to P and Z. At least that's the way I felt, so no.
Plus the fact that this change was coming was made known, right? So that also kind of prevented a lot of discussion on it, yeah.
Brian, Heidebrink, do you feel that there'd be enough room on here on the 2C and 2B to put a building? Because I know last time we discussed it, you were worried about spacing for parking and everything. So I don't want to pinch those commercial lots so much that all of a sudden now they become irrelevant. Because we don't have commercial in town is our problem. And that's why we throw those on Holly. That's why we did this originally.
Yeah, we're 309 feet deep. So we can go down to as thin as 205 and it's tight. I mean, we're losing sidewalks in the back and stuff on like a strip mall development. So 215 is actually a better number for us. Is kind of, is really kind of the minimum. But if we're doing like a strip development, we usually run about 225 or 230. is where we're at, and we're still at 309. So we're still gonna be ample, we're gonna have extra green space around that, and that allows for an 80-foot building. So a 80-foot, that's kind of our typical, whether it's an office building or a retail center. And I'll let Brian, sorry, Brian jumped in front, but that's where we set that number, so, so we're way good from our perspective, from what we typically build, which is a parking lot, a buffer strip, along Holly, a 65-foot curb-to-curb parking lot, 15 feet of sidewalk, 80-foot building, and 5-foot sidewalk in behind. So this will actually accommodate a drive lane behind, so we can have garbage behind the buildings. Is what would this would be wide enough to do that. So we're not pinching it. So we could get to a deeper building if someone wanted. They could get to a. Yeah, well, it's, on retail, once you get past an 80-foot deep building, 80 foot's actually pretty deep, 70, 75 is probably almost better, because if, people want 1,500 square foot spaces, and if you got 80-foot deep buildings, you're not very wide, and it starts to look like a bowling, you open up the front door, and it looks like a bowling alley, to get a small retail space in it. So it gets too narrow, so there's kind of a maximum depth. So if you're going deeper than 80, it's a special use. Somebody's got something in mind. An office building could go deeper than 80. That wouldn't be a problem. So there's plenty of room to put offices along there too.
Do we have any more questions? I see Brian's calculating something, so just wait till he gets done.
Because it backs up against residential, it does increase the setback on the rear yard, a little bit. But it leaves about 150 feet. So like you said, if we got our front setback, a double loaded 65-foot, parking lot, that's gonna leave 150 feet basically for a rear driveway for your delivery vehicles and the building. So if you've got 35, 40 feet in the back, for dumpsters and mechanical units and things like that might be in the back of the building, two-way access behind there, that's still going to leave, as they said, about 80 plus feet for the building.
I would make a motion to recommend passing to city council.
No, second.
Okay, we get a motion and a second to, recommend to city council for the rezone. Any more questions for these gentlemen? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Okay, let's take a roll call, Paul.
Megan. Brian. Brooks.
Aye.
Rob. Alyssa. Michael.
So we have a pass? 4-2. 4-2. Okay, thanks guys for your patience, appreciate it, thanks for bringing back a
Just
change.
clarifying for the minutes when we have to go back and listen, Rob and Brian were the nays, correct? Okay, just so make sure we record correctly.
And thanks for bringing in this one. That helped me a lot. Well, yeah, it's fancy.
All right, so we need to adjourn planning and zoning, right, and reconvene as Board of Adjustment?
Correct.
So we need a motion for that?
So moved.
I'd bring second.
All in favor? Opposed? All right. So now we're moving on to Board of Adjustment. We have the same, commission here as we had for planning and zoning. So we need to approve the agenda, please.
I'd bring so moved.
Second, no?
Motion and second to approve the agenda for Board of Adjustment. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we have a variance, request on Ash Place.
All right, so we do have a PDF that Tammy is working on printing that they sent to us, but we have two representatives of Quickstar on Teams as well as the owner of Brandon 90 Plaza here to talk about the variance request. So hopefully everyone on Teams can hear us and hopefully we'll be able to hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much.
We'll let Marwin lead us off.
Marwin Hofer, 204 West St. Andrews, Sioux Falls. I'm the owner of the Brandon 90 Plaza. I was here a couple months ago about a tire store looking for a variance, and I indicated that there was a C store coming down the pike with the same request. On Brandon 90 Plaza, the linchpin of the development is the C store. I've got hotel people we're talking to, restaurants, and across the board is, when's the C store coming? This is the linchpin. They bought 3 acres here. They closed here a month ago. Quickstar, they do great business. Love to have them in South Dakota. And they second location here in Brandon. And looking for a variance. And they've done a great job of putting together a packet. And appreciate your attention with that.
So we're passing out the information that was sent over in the PDF.
Thank you very much.
So that's probably a little easier for them than trying to figure out what it is on the screen that's a little ways away from them. So we'll let you take it away whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you everyone. My name is Matthew Lepke. I am the signage project manager for Quickstar. And my address is 1626 Oak Street, La Crosse, Wisconsin. So you have in front of you not only the request letter, but also the packet there with the sign survey. And we are requesting 2 variances tonight, sign height and sign area from code So that's a significant difference. Not to mention you have multi-story buildings there on the west side of the road on Split Rock. So that's part of the reason why the sign needs to be taller than would be allowed by code. And then also keeping in mind that the maximum building height in the GD zone is 45 feet. So even if you build a code compliant sign and somebody else built the building that complied with the maximum height, the sign would disappear for that reason as well. So those are a couple of the main reasons why. And we'll talk you through the survey in just a moment, but 90 feet was essentially the minimum height that was visible as you were headed eastbound toward the exit on 90. That was due to the multiple obstructions, the buildings, other signs, billboard, you name that kind of thing. All of those, of course, are west of Split Rock, so they're at a much higher elevation than our site. One of the other things we do when we look at different sites, of course, interstates, you can drive pretty fast on the interstate. If folks are going 80, and that's assuming they're only going 80, of course, folks need time in advance to figure out where to go and to look for, hey, where am I headed? I heard there's a Quick Star here. That's one of the other reasons why we're requesting that additional height. So what I'd like to do now is talk you through what was just handed out, that sign survey. And in particular, I want you to turn to, let's have you go to the 8th page. So you'll be looking eastbound, and the 3 photos you'll see are from 7/10, 6/10, and 5/10 from the exit. So you haven't yet crossed the railroad tracks, but you're coming toward them, headed eastbound. Now, the company that did this is based in Watertown, and it does sign surveys for different convenience stores all over the country. So it has a pretty good handle on how things look and what to expect. One of the things in these photos you'll see is it superimposes how the sign would look in each of those photos. So it takes the sign at scale. So this is the same as it would look on the ground there, once constructed, and it superimposes it in the various photos that are taken. The 7/10 of a mile photo, you can see there's an arrow there. You can't see the sign, even 90-foot tall sign, 7/10 of a mile from the exit because of the other buildings and signs. 6/10 and 5/10, you can barely see it peeking out there next to, well, kind of next to the billboard there, not the Dakota Floors, but the other billboard that you approach as you get closer. So if you turn to the next page, please, then you'll see 4/10 of a mile, 3/10, 2/10. Now at this point, you can see the water tower in the distance, and there's a billboard, and then you can see lower than all of that, you see the red for the top of the sign. And as you follow and get closer to the railroad viaduct there, you can start to see the sign separate a little bit from its surroundings. It's then to the left as you're looking there up the water tower. It's still pretty short compared to everything else around it. You turn the page then, you look at 1/10 of a mile and at the exit. And you see at this point, you can compare to some of the other signs around there, the DP sign, the Holiday Inn Express sign, the Quality Inn sign as well there. And even at the height that we're requesting, you can see it still looks shorter than all of those because of the fact it's down in the hole there, east of Split Rock. So this was what I wanted to convey is I understand it sounds like a large number on paper, but again, for people driving this direction, it's just tall enough to see over those other things once you get closer in. And then certainly by the time folks are deciding if they want to exit, they can see it just enough to make an informed decision. But it's not something that's going to loom over everything else. That's not our preference. We have taller signs in other places, but we try to make them appropriate for every specific location. So again, keep this in mind as I talk through a couple other points. But again, this is how it would look as constructed, and it definitely would still be shorter, or appear to be shorter, for folks coming eastbound than you might expect. Now, one other aspect of when we're making these sign requests is how large the 9.5 foot tall digit, the number you would see for the price of fuel. For the optimum distance for a 9.5 foot tall digit would be 1,200 feet. Now, in this case, we're proposing a digit that would be 8 feet 4 inches tall, and it would be about 1,300 feet off of the beginning of the westbound off ramp. So the digits are slightly smaller than what would be the optimal size. You'll still be able to read them, but they're not absolutely dead on perfect. They're slightly smaller. So again, that speaks to the fact that we have experience doing these in different places, and we don't want to overwhelm the surroundings. We try to do it in a way it'll work. People will be able to read it just fine. But we don't need to go quite as large as what the optimal may be for that. And again, just as a couple of examples, we have a 130-foot tall sign in Mitchellville, Iowa, just east of Des Moines, with the same size digits as are proposed here. And then also there's a sign for a store building in Dubuque this year on the other side of Iowa. That'll have a 105-foot tall sign. So again, we try to tailor the signs, the size and the height based on each individual location. Now quickly running through the variances, the prongs for the variance test, unnecessary hardship, of course, being the most notable of them. We, of course, did not create the topographic difference between west of Split Rock and east and being down a hole, as well as all those other buildings that are already there, and the other structures didn't build any of those. So because of that substantial elevation difference and the fact all those things are in the way, exacerbating that difference, that does quantify unnecessary hardship. Now, the second prong, I think the important thing to note is there are multiple other businesses, including other convenience stores. You've got a Circle K, you have a BP. And so not allowing the variances in this case, especially because we're the only one of those that's down the hill. I realize Circle K is south a little bit, but it's not down in the bowl in I-90 Plaza, as we are. So not allowing the variances then, it really wouldn't be good for the goose, good for the gander, because it wouldn't be an equal comparison between businesses in that same type of business as C-stores. Now, additionally, is this the minimum variance that would alleviate the hardship? Yes, in the sense that building it any shorter, particularly the highway sign, you just wouldn't see it headed eastbound, as I showed you a moment ago in the survey. And then just having the sign a size that people can actually read it from the interstate is the other major component of that. The fourth prong, again, these are, as you saw, other signs nearby, the Holiday Inn Express, the BP, the Quality Inn. Those signs still appear larger, even though ours is decently sized, just because of proximity to the interstate, to the off-ramp, that sort of thing. So ours actually appears smaller, in part because it's downhill. And then moving to the sixth prong of the variances, it specifically in the test mentions topography. I think I've said a lot about topography here. You understand that, and of course we didn't create that difference in elevation. So just circling back again, we need to give motorists enough time, assuming they're going 80, 85 miles an hour, for them to be able to read the sign, figure out they want, oh, hey, we need to get fuel here, we need to go to the bathroom, get something to eat, decide to get off the interstate, check their surroundings, change lanes if they need to, and get off I-90. If you're trying to do all of that in a matter of just a few seconds, that's where having a sign that's tall enough, large enough for them to be able to see it and understand what it says, rather than look at their phones, trying to figure out where is this place, because they can't see it. That's one of the big things. We don't want people distracted at 80 or 85 miles an hour. And then finally, the 35-foot pylon sign is slightly taller than what code allows. And again, that's due to the fact people are going downhill and other buildings will be built up over time. We're just trying to make sure when people come south on Split Rock, they can look and, oh, there it is. They can see it. So that's the summary of what we've requested. And I certainly appreciate your time. And I will do my best. It's kind of hard to hear folks. So please do speak in the microphone when you have questions, and we will be happy to answer your questions.
Patrick, where are we on our interstate overlay? Is that been,
So the interstate overlay, the public hearing on that will be the way the calendar falls would be the 18th. Since the 19th, things are closed, our next meeting is the 18th. So I believe that is scheduled for the 18th. And that's the only one. We have a couple going through at the same time. I didn't want to put them all together because the interstate sign overlay changes a bunch of numbers, and I didn't want some shenanigans to happen where three go through at the same time and the interstate signage one is third, so then the numbers go through and it doesn't shift right or something. So we have the one going through and then the rest. But my understanding is the 18th.
Has that been shared with the applicant?
We have not directly talked about that with them. I don't know if Marwin has or not. But, okay. So we are currently working on an overlay district to our zoning code that would overlay the general business district for lots within 1,400 feet of the center of the interstate. Recognizing that general business elsewhere in town isn't necessarily similarly situated as general business off the highway in terms of signage and size of signage and all sorts of things. So that is currently a work in progress. The one part that probably interests them the most specifically is the height that would be allowed in the overlay district is 90 feet.
Patrick, you,
Thank you.
Patrick, you said that the 18th would be the public hearing, the planning and zoning public hearing.
I believe so.
On that, but then, can you tell
So-
us the timeline of the rest of that
Yep.
process?
So, amendments to the zoning code take a long time. A variance is certainly quicker. So, if the public hearing with planning and zoning is on the 18th, the next step would be city council. The city council would have met on the 16th. So, their next meeting unfortunately, the 1st of July is a Tuesday. So then the first meeting with the city council in July is the 7th. So conceptually too, if the planning and zoning public hearing were for some reason the 3rd, which at the end of the meeting we'll talk about whether there'll be enough of you here for the 3rd. But either way, say city council, the first reading is the 7th. The second reading would be the 21st. If it passed, we would send the text of the change to the newspaper on the 25th. They would publish it on the 30th. You'd add 20 days. So you're looking at somewhere between the 18th and the 20th of August as an effective date.
And if that were in effect, the way it's written now, would these folks need a variance?
The variance would be the number of signs. I don't believe we touched how many you could have. It was just the height of them. So they want 2 freestanding signs, so the second would require something.
And
Unless
size.
our current GB language that we're working through underlying that ultimately changes it, which that's still a work in progress as well.
Yeah.
So potentially at the end of the road, they might not.
But specifically, I think the public hearing scheduled could, if successful and ultimately passed all the way through, could alleviate the height requirement. But there are other considerations like the sign area that they're proposing is, still a question. And
Correct. Our proposed GB does not change the area of the sign. The maximum would still be 200. You could have potentially more as it's currently written, but there's still the max 200 size per sign.
If the proposed changes for what we're talking about for the 2 items, the quantity of signs and the height of signs in the interstate district, if those don't pass, then obviously this variance would not be looked upon favorably either. So I guess what I'm saying is, we're proposing basically to accommodate half of what they're asking for with the height and the quantity of signs. That's what we're working on. That's what we're trying to get passed through. If those are met with resistance by public when they come, when these are read for official readings, and the public shows up and no, we don't want this, and it gets voted down either here based on that opposition or at city council, then approving this variance would receive the same feedback by the public, because it's basically doing what we're working on getting passed.
Does that timeline work for you guys as the applicant?
How fast are you looking to move our quick start people?
So are you saying, how much time are we talking about full cycle in terms of P and Z reviews it, council reviews it? If it were approved and codified, how much time would that be out from now?
So the first one that would change the height would if assuming it passes and everything moves right along, would be sometime between the 18th and 20th of August. Since the public hearing on the general business change generally is thumbs up or down from you all today, and then schedule a public hearing, you're probably looking at mid-late September for the second half of that. I imagine you probably want to go because it's building season.
Correct, I'll chime in. This is Zach Poggle from Quick Star's real estate team. We have to plan out pretty far in advance with our construction teams on when development's going to take place. So pushing this conversation into August or September does pose some challenges with that discussion.
But this would be just for the sign permit, not the building permit.
And, excuse me, did we not pass a variance request recently from a different business in the I-90 Plaza for a taller sign than usual?
Correct. And that was Les Schwab. Was that 45, 50? Somewhere in there?
50. I looked up the meeting minutes because I was
Okay.
curious. So yeah, it was a 50-foot.
And I think they
Proposed sign.
didn't apply for a variance on number or size. It was just height.
Okay, so can the applicant talk about the part where he's asking for a more number of signs? I kinda heard him say something about it in passing, but could he speak a little bit more on that part of the request?
Certainly. So the highway-oriented sign would be at the northwest corner, I say corner of the property, it's kind of rounded, of course, there, but what effectively would be the northwest corner of the property. However, the street leading down, Ash Street, leading down from Split Rock is the way you turn to go down to the site, so there was a pylon sign proposed for that southwest corner. So that's the second sign, is if people get to the corner of Ash and Split Rock and they look left, oh, okay, that's where we go down here to get in there. And so then, as I say, the highway-oriented sign would be the northwest corner, if you will, just basically the other end, south end versus north end there. That's where the two signs would be proposed.
Thank you.
And we're currently working on, and I think that's a discussion item for later tonight, on allowing multiple signs if you have enough frontage. So, depending on where we end up on that discussion, that may be allowed anyway. So most of this is gonna be discussed and hashed out, whether or not we allow that or not, in this area. And I kinda feel like we're in this process, and like Brian said, if it doesn't bode well for us, if we allow a variance and then these ordinances that we're working on changing fail, that just doesn't, so I'm leaning towards letting the process work itself out over these two issues, the number of signs and the height. And once those work themselves out, we're left with the size, and that's something that we can discuss, but, we're well within the process. I think we should let the process work itself out.
I have a question for Patrick.
Sure.
If the board decided to table this and discuss the code amendments, that are coming up, what would become of the variance request? Because theoretically, if it's not acted upon or denied, then there's an amount of time you have to wait before you can come back. So that would potentially put us at a disadvantage that may not be foreseen should some of those code amendments for some reason not go through. That would be why I would say we probably ought to stay the course with the variance requests.
So let's see if, and I imagine you probably looked through our code, so your memory on
That came up during the tire store too,
So,
I think.
yes,
once
there
is-
is
once is
a
6 months?
6 months that they cannot bring substantially the same thing back. We couldn't, someone wants to build the deck this way, you say no. Oh, well, then we'll lop off 6 inches and we'll bring it back because it's new. That's the kind of thing it prevents. So
But if we table it,
yeah, it could
It stays
potentially
active.
be tabled.
if we reject it,
Indefinitely.
they have to wait that long
Correct.
to reapply. So we can table it or take no action, and it remains active.
Correct. Their other avenue would be if you all deny it, they do have a right to appeal to the city council. We would just need to know within 5 working days, and then it would have to be noticed again for the city council, and that would take probably a month-ish worth of time. And the city council would hear no new evidence but what was presented here. So you can't, beef up your argument.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't know if I should say this, I'm in no position to speak on behalf of, as the authority that Zach and Matthew would have, but in the construction world, Quickstar is a whole different animal. You look at, this is the 13th or 14th location at Metro Sioux Falls, and Zach, Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, but once they start, 90 days, they're opening the doors. It is warp speed what they work, so if there's any type of delay, that's huge in their world, and Matt, I'll let you comment on that.
You're correct there, and I guess I'll reiterate on my end that we need certainty of what signage is going to be allowed before we feel comfortable breaking ground and commencing development of the site. Marlon is correct. For a site like this, from the time we started and broke ground to the time we open the doors, it's 110 days. It's a pretty short window.
Ask a question of the applicant. So when you guys did your research, site analysis, what was, and you brought your team looking at this particular site, what was your approach prior to coming to tonight?
Sure. So, given our existing location within Brandon, that's more of our in-town store. This one was being treated more as the freeway oriented, so picking up that additional customer. Viewing the signs around it, as Matthew talked about, we felt confident that we would be able to receive equitable treatment and have the same sort of visibility as those competitor businesses. So that was really our thought coming into it. Yes, the reason you're seeing the variance request now versus earlier on in our process too, is that we wanted to act in good faith across the site plan approval process, make sure that everything met the city's desires there, which they were great to work with on those approvals. So we waited to come with this request until our site plan was fully approved and in place.
I know the 90 feet may seem daunting, but as Matthew mentioned, you're not comparing apples to apples. It should be written up as elevation. What's the elevation? Sea level. This thing was we had 50 acres in a floodplain, and wasn't going to work until we moved it out of the floodplain. Obviously, it's still a hole, and 90 feet may seem daunting, but look at the elevation is competitive to what's in the neighborhood.
And we've had a lot of discussions about sign height with our overlay district and other discussions we've had, so granted, none of it has passed, it's just coming up for a public hearing, but we have discussed, currently, I believe the draft will show a 90-foot height in that language. So I guess for me, the biggest concern, and jumping back to one other point, I think we've also discussed with certain size of lot or frontages in a different code review, and it's just in discussion right now, the possibility of multiple signs. That's also been discussed, also not acted on. So the big issue for me that I'm thinking through is the sign area of the interstate oriented sign at 567 square feet, which is quite larger than what we've discussed. We've discussed multiple signs, but I believe to this point, most of the discussion is still centered around the 200-foot maximum per sign. So that's the big differentiator for me. And I'll follow the question to the applicant. Going back to your first comments and when you took us through the packet, the sign that you said is represented in those photos, the eastbound, that is the 90-foot, 567 square foot sign that you're saying is represented in those photos?
That's correct.
So I heard you say that, we're going through this process of amending the code. And if residents came in and we had feedback from them, it would put the board in a bad spot. What if we weren't doing that? What if this was all new material? And we weren't trying to look at heights and two signs and potentially size? How would we deal with it then?
I think we commonly discuss when we have variance requests that we're essentially setting a standard when we pass a variance, so there would still be a burden there of saying, is this request sufficiently, we've had a few that there's a really, really specific or multiple specific aspects of a application that make it not applicable in very many situations. But if not for that kind of specificity, then we're really setting a standard. So that's, I think, not to speak for Brian, but I think that's maybe where some of the concern comes in for me, is that we're kind of jumping ahead and sort of setting a standard, which we're currently working through. We're jumping to passing something sort of when we're still discussing it.
As I see it, if we pass this as a variance, it becomes a standard citywide.
You mean instead of it being in an overlay district?
Well, that's why we're doing the overlay district,
Right.
is because
Limited.
yeah, it sets a standard of where these taller signs are. We're also trying to work through the number of signs, which that hopefully will iron itself out. But by saying, oh, we're gonna award a variance, anybody in the city can say, well, I need a 90-foot sign because I want to attract people from farther away than just the street in front of my business. I want to attract people from across town. Is that a hardship? That's the difficult question.
I have a question if am I allowed to ask a question or are you guys in deliberation?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to be out of order. So my question is this, generally variances don't set a precedent and they're each heard based on their own individual circumstances. And I just want to make sure that that was kind of how you were looking at it. I mean, that was part of the reason I didn't really lean on the Wes Schwab decision because it was a different site than ours. It's in a different spot within the development and that sort of thing. So I certainly understand the concern, but generally variances, it's every site is taken on its own circumstances and then it shouldn't really affect others around it because everybody has their own.
I have a question. I might have heard wrong earlier, so I just wanted to make sure I understand it correctly. Our diagram here shows that the price of the gas is 8 foot 10 inches. But I thought I heard you say 8 foot 4 inches.
Yes, you're correct. So the outside frame of the box is 8 feet 10 inches tall.
Okay.
And then the area the digits displayed on is 8 feet 4.
Okay. And yeah, I just want to make sure I heard right, and also that might make a difference in how many square feet of sign we're talking about.
Sure, that makes sense. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Okay, Okay, Patrick, so what are our options here? Sorry, Brooks.
So, this is a variance, so in order to grant a variance, you need 2/3 of your members, which, since you're 6, it's a majority. 4 out of 6, and you need that anyway. So you can either approve the variance, you can approve a variance with conditions, you can deny, you can table.
Is the Holiday Inn and Express, is that a sign or a billboard? Does anybody remember?
Yeah, I could consider it to be a sign.
Okay. Do we know the area of that sign?
In a packet probably 3 or 4 months ago, we had all the signage measured out, but it was, yeah, fairly large.
But it's currently non-conforming, right?
I would imagine so.
So, it's a non-conforming sign, so it doesn't really
Yeah,
matter
I
for
was just
discussion,
trying to
but-
find one to compare it
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
visually
Sure, I understand that.
in the pictures.
Could I ask the applicant to, there's a lot of documentation here. I mean, like 6 pages. Exactly what you're requesting. The 90-foot sign, a second sign, I wasn't able to find the size of the second sign and the height of the second sign. And then you're also asking for 567 square feet in lieu of 200, correct?
Okay, so you're